Hey, if you've got this part of the video, you've got the live unedited edition Home Gadget Geeks Thursday night, August 4th, 2022. It's 8 p.m. or just a second or two before 8 p.m. in the Central Time Zone. If you got that any other time than that, you've got the recorded version on YouTube. And it's okay. We're going to do a beer port. Just sit through it. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Just don't go anywhere. Then the show will start here in a few minutes. If you haven't subscribed, head over out to theaverageguy.tv/subscribe. There's all kinds of ways you can subscribe. That way you don't ever miss an episode. We'll give it a few minutes. Looks like Joe and Brian have already showed up. Shown up? There we go. Showed up in the chat room. I don't know. My English isn't that great tonight. I've not even had beer yet, and I'm already screwing up.
This is going to be a great show.
I'm already screwing up the English language. So Brian, Joe, thanks for coming out tonight. Dan, we traditionally do a beer pour to kind of get things going in the pre-show. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm doing a local brewery from Coop here in Oklahoma City.
Let me get that.
Oh, get a little bit bigger.
Throw that up there. Coop is that what it's? Okay.
Yep.
And it's called
Saturday Siren. Yep.
And
it's Pilsner.
What? Okay, so it's a Pils, so a little sweet, right? Yeah.
So the story behind the name Saturday Siren doesn't make sense if you're not outside of Oklahoma. Because of all the tornadoes on Saturday at noon, they test the tornado sirens. So Saturday at noon, it always goes off.
It's noon. I think it's 10 here. We do the same thing. Yeah, I think it's 10. And they may even do it during the week now, like on a Tuesday or so. I think that like the first Tuesday of the month they do it. Maybe people complained about Saturdays being, So in Oklahoma City, because that is you're in the heart of Tornado Alley. Like, yeah, it's like a magnet for you guys.
If we did it on Tuesday, that means there's one coming.
That's probably why. And you always do them in the morning because you never get those tornadoes first thing in the morning. They're always afternoon. The atmosphere needs to heat up a little bit.
We like to diversify with, we don't pick specific times. It happens all the time.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. Joe says it's Wednesdays. I think he's out in Indiana, Illinois. So Joe, is that right? I can't remember, but yeah, they say Wednesdays. So it's always good. I am. So what's the brewing? Where's that from again? The brewing company that makes that?
It's here in Oklahoma City. Coop.
Local brew.
Yeah.
Local stuff. I have full-fledged brewery out of Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is just across the river. We really don't have very many good. I shouldn't say that because everybody now it's from Council Bluffs will come burn my house down. But we don't have that many great breweries, I think, over on the other side in Council Bluffs. Nebraska, by far, in the Omaha area, Papillion in particular, has some really good breweries. But this is a Heffy. So we were out. I just love these in the summer. These are just like a Pilsner. They're just delicious, right? Kind of a good summer brew. Do you have a go-to, Dan? Like a go-to beer? What's your favorite?
Honestly, not really. I guess a Guinness or something like that. But when it's 100 degrees outside for going on like 2 weeks straight, that gets pretty heavy. So prefer a lighter for that. But
you shandy guy at all? Do you like shandies in the summer?
I do, but I don't know if there's like a go-to for that. It tends to be like if I'm with friends and they have them, then I'll drink them. But I don't really.
They seemed really popular 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then seems like they've dropped off. I mean, like everybody shandy and everybody and Leinenkugels kind of made them. I think kind of made them real popular, but doesn't seem like they're as popular. And it's really diversified. Like, we got a brewery making Dunkels that I really like, and when I say that, people go, "What's a Dunkel?" And it's just a really delicious beer. And then, of course, in the winter, I try to go Imperial Stout at all possible, or oatmeal stout or milk stout, just to get. We've got a brewery here, Zipline, and they make one. It's like 14%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like a glass of wine. Like, holy cow! Joe's in Arkansas. Sorry, I knew that, Joe. I don't know why I was thinking you were farther north. So sorry about that. Yeah, it's do you find yourself a seasonal beer guy, or will you mix it up? Just kind of how you feel.
Kind of mix it up. Honestly, it's kind of seasonal if I switch between beer or wine. A lot. So I used to work at a winery on the office side, and so really got into wines then. And so, and, kind of depends on how I feel.
Yeah.
I'm a
No. You a
either way.
spirits guy at all? Do you have any? You do much with bourbon or
Yeah.
whiskey or vodka?
Yeah. Not a lot of, I guess, not like a lot of cocktails straight up, but I'll break down like a whiskey or something like that, or rum or something like that would usually be my go-to when I do spirits. But yeah.
There's kind of a trend for these mixers now and some of them are just junk, but there are some pretty good, like High West is making both a Manhattan and a old fashioned mixer that it's all everything, the bitters and the simple syrup are in it. All you gotta do is add the orange.
Oh,
and
I'll have to check for that.
I've been trying some of those. They're not all great. So but I found a Knob Creek makes one that's pretty good. So High West and Knob Creek would be the two that I'd look for. You just find them like you have to go to a hefty size liquor store to do that. But then just try one till you get one you like. And it makes, for me anyways, it like sometimes an old fashioned it's just I don't want to spend that much time making it.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
It's like and like, Jim, it takes 5 minutes. I know I don't have 5 minutes. I want to drink.
It's 5 minutes
now.
too long.
If I wanted to wait 5 minutes, I could make ramen noodles, but I don't like popcorn, like all those things in 5 minutes. But it was it's just gotten, it's what's kind of nice is, even in the summer, pull that bottle out. I refrigerate them just so they're cold, just so they don't melt the ice right off the chute, and then throw those in, and you're kind of off and running with. And they've got a couple. They have maybe 4 or 5 different kinds of cocktails that are pre-made. It's not bad.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I haven't really looked at a lot of those pre-made things before. I'm familiar with like the pre-made margarita mixes and things like that.
Yeah.
I've never really been a big fan of those. So just assume that
anything in a can, don't buy it. It needs to be in a bottle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it needs to be in a bottle. Anything in a can's not, at least in my experience, hasn't been very good. But if it's bottled, and they come like the Knob Creek one comes in a 250 milliliter. It almost looks like a flask. Flask shape.
Okay.
It's $5. You get three cocktails out of it. So pretty good way to get it done. Give it a try. All right. Yeah. Well, let's kick this thing off. We got some stuff to chat about here. You know the routine, and let me get this thing going. Guys, thanks for coming out. Oh, well, John. Okay, hold on. Before we get going here, John, since John's pointing out, it's the 3rd week in a row that I've worn a blue shirt, and that's very true, John. Thank you for.
But is it the same blue shirt?
No,
you at least change. Okay, good.
No, I had a Under Armour long sleeve one, and then last week I had a button up. I had a collared shirt, which I don't wear those anymore. I mean, not sure why I was wearing it that day, but I was. And then a t-shirt today. This was the work from home. Feel like Friday because I'm traveling tomorrow. Feels like Friday shorts and t-shirt work day from home. Those are great. John, thank you for paying attention. He says, see, I'm paying attention. So thanks for paying attention out there, John. Appreciate it. All right, guys, hang tight. We got some photography stuff and storage. We'll get a little home storage stuff going tonight. So thanks for coming out. Let me kick this thing off. Hold on, let's get John off the screen. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks show number 541, recorded on August 4th, 2022. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a sweltering, and Dan LeFebvre's with us. Dan's down in Oklahoma City. It has to be infinitely hotter down there, Dan. Are you doing okay? You guys doing okay down there in Oklahoma City?
Just say I am very thankful for air conditioning. That's for sure.
How did the pioneers that came out here? I'm
starting to understand why life expectancy was not so high.
What made them go, yeah, I'm just going to stop here? I mean, we know some of them stopped because the wagon wheel broke and they couldn't go any farther. And some of those, they promised and then never made it to California and those kinds of things. It's so hot. They must not have made that decision in August. Right? I mean, because how did they do that? I don't get it.
I have no idea. If they made the decision in the summer, it was the wrong decision. Just
Oh, and think about it. They probably we probably went. I mean, air conditioning is still in. And you think about history is a pretty recent kind of thing, and we take it for granted. I don't know how I'd survive if we. John's saying, he's out in Maryland, and they were 98, and just I think every place is suffering. Fortunately, we have modern air conditioning. Of course, we got some modern show notes. We'll post this show with some show notes. Not a whole lot of them this week, but out at theaverageguy.tv. Big thanks. Akarsh Vinod joined me last week. We had a little chat about DO Technologies, that little speaker. If you didn't get a chance to see it yet, head back to 540. He gave me a code at the end of the show that would get you, I think, 18% off the 3-pack. And so if you're interested in doing something like that, not a bad way to get in on that. And of course, Akarsh, thanks for doing that. I appreciate him coming out. Again, Dio was the speaker. And if you check out the show notes, theaverageguy.tv/HGG540, I put the link for the discount code in there as well. Something's going on behind me. It's kind of alarming. Like I mentioned before, Dan LeFebvre is out here tonight. Dan, not only being a Patreon sponsor for what we do on Saturday mornings for Ask the Podcast Coach, and Dan, the Based on a True Story podcast mug that you sent me is so good. I was out in the shed the other day enjoying a cigar. It was hot. I put ice water in there. I drank all the water. The ice would not melt. Like, I wanted more water, but that thing was so well constructed, the ice didn't melt. So I was like, darn it, I have to get a worse cup. But thanks, Dan. Thanks for sponsoring on over there on Ask the Podcast Coach. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for everything you do. Yeah, I've got one of those too. I really like it. That mug, that thing is really well done.
It's like a Yeti, or it's that kind of quality.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's actually a Yeti brand, but yeah,
we'll just call it that because
okay.
It's cool. It's cool. It's super cool. They're very much worth their weight. Especially, I mean, again, I was out there for an hour and a half. And it was super cool. Last time we had you on, we looked at some of the tech stories or movies that you had covered on Based on a True Story podcast. By the way, if you need a really cool podcast to listen to, Dan's would be a good one to go out and subscribe to, listen to a couple, because he's done some pretty cool movies, especially recently. Based on a True Story podcast.com, Zero Dark 30, Lawless, Jurassic Park, Monty Python, and the Life of Brian. Wait a minute. Was that a true story? Hold on. How does that work?
I honestly, some of those, and I've really had some fun with it. So for a long time, I did a Patreon side where I would kind of extract history from completely fictional movies. And then I slowed on that mostly because of time. And then thought, well, let's try some of that on the regular show. So things like, Life of Brian. I mean, there's a real history in there, and they use it to obviously be
how they made the movie, or is it because it certainly it has a historical context, right? First century AD. Right. But it's a great movie, by the way. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, yes, that's a great Monty Python's Life of Brian is what we're talking about. So it does have a historical content, right?
Yeah. So the expert that I talked to, Adele Reinhardt's, talking about the history, right? So around the time of Jesus and that era, and the things that they used, and how the Roman occupation of Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff, and how it was portrayed in the movie versus how it would have actually been, that sort of thing.
I can't imagine it was close at all. Like, I mean,
honestly, closer than you would think. I mean,
okay.
in the ways that they portrayed it, but then obviously being Monty Python, they obviously pushed it, right?
Yeah.
In ways that are obvious, right? I mean, it's Brian, right? Obviously he's not real, but a lot of just that it happened and that kind of stuff, because they weren't trying to be so close. I found Saving Private Ryan, Brian Ryan kind of rhymes, made me think of that.
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan's another good example, right? Where it's a fictional story, but it's set in history. And Private Ryan's not real. But because of that, they're able to almost follow along with history a lot more so, because there are parts that honestly we just don't know, especially when you're talking about around the time of Jesus and all that, because we start to throw in a lot of the religious side and all that kind of stuff. And there's just a lot of stuff from that ancient times that we don't know. And so they're able to fill in a lot of those holes that ways. So
No, that's super cool. That I never expected when I logged into, on Saturday mornings, I always kind of promo what's out there. And I logged into Life of Brian. What? Have you lost your mind, Dan? So is Monty Python and the Holy Grail on the docket at all? Are we going to cover that?
I would love to. It's be a matter of finding someone to chat about that. That's another part of it too. I mean, like the lady that I talked to for that, I caught her while she was teaching in Italy, and pretty much like, this is the only time I can do it. Okay, well then maybe I will, but who knows when.
Yeah. Well, it'd be great. I mean, I'm waiting with bated breath for the Holy Grail. That's in the Collison house. That's the top. I mean, that's the pinnacle of most funny movies that we enjoy watching. We quote hundreds.
What are you going to do? Bleed on me?
My kids can do. My kids, these are kids that, I mean, this movie's old and they can quote like 90% of the movie. You have Jurassic Park / Jurassic World. Of course, that's also not factual or based on what was the angle that you took there to kind of how did that interview go?
That was good. So even though Jurassic Park started in 93, the first movie, to Jurassic World, the latest one, Dominion, kind of finalizing the whole thing in 2022. Different directors, different set of actors, all that kind of stuff throughout. But Jack Horner, the guy that I talked to, was the paleontology consultant from the first movie in 93 all the way through to the latest one. So it's fascinating, things like one of the big things, right? So dinosaurs having feathers. They knew that in the first one, when they made the first movie, just computer technology wasn't there to a point to where they could make feathers on dinosaurs and make it look real. Plus, as Jack mentioned, he was chatting with Steven Spielberg, like he wanted it to be more of a horror, scary movie, right? And then, of course, you do that in the first movie. Well, you can't have raptors that have feathers in the first, or raptors that don't have feathers in the first movie. And then later on, when technology advances, all of a sudden they have feathers. So you kind of have that continuity. So things like that, where it's just fascinating to learn about some of the choices that they make. Like, here's what really would have been, but we made this conscious decision that we're going to change it.
Well, I mean, George Lucas went back and changed things. Why couldn't they? They could just go back and redo the movie and recreate all the special effects for it.
Well, in some ways. So, I mean, especially if, I don't know if you've seen the later ones, in Jurassic World, they start introducing dinosaurs with feathers. But as I was talking with Jack about that, he made the point that the concept was with Jurassic World is we're still seeing things like, the T-Rex and the raptors that were cloned in the 93 movie. So it's not just that they're new animals, but they're actually ones from that. So that continuity, they had to keep that in that way, which I never really thought of, but that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's I love that you took two movies that don't have any zero historical context for the most part.
The storyline, for sure.
Loosely.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park, none. and really had a good conversation. Again, for someone who is into paleontology, that would be a very interesting conversation, because this is bringing that era to life. And I think we've actually seen, because of that, when we think about those periods in history, 262 million to about 66 million, when we look at that period of history, it's brought that to life. I think when I was a kid and we talked about dinosaurs, we had a little clay stick figure kind of thing or a few bones. And now you can get a really, based on what we know, still probably not 100% accurate, but a pretty good representation. And of course, the digital photography, and that's not really the right word, but the film, what do you call a film?
The visual effects, computer graphics that are,
there we go.
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Something like that. It had a fancy word, but it's okay. The visual effects on it are super, they're so realistic, and it does give us, it can kind of take us there. from and it's good to know, since 93 we are still learning. We
For
are
sure.
still
I mean, one of the things kind of surprised me that I didn't realize when I was talking with Jack. He was saying that all of the T-Rex skeletons that we found are still growing. So we don't really know exactly how big a T-Rex could be just from the fossils and stuff that we found. And so things like that. I mean, yeah, but you have in a movie, you're going to have to pick a size. And so it's just fascinating, those types of things that what we know versus what the decisions that they make in movies to tell the story.
Right.
That's kind of premise behind my show.
Yeah. Well, and then, you gotta pick a point in time too. Like those, I mean, over the course of 200 million years, there were many different versions of those, but at some point you got to decide, well, we're going to land on this one. Right. And so it's kind of incredible stuff. The last one I'll mention, then we'll move on here, is you just recently did one on Zero Dark 30, which is a very, very recent,
a little different than the Jurassic Park era time period.
Well, very, very, very recent history. Lots of, and this could maybe debated too. Lots of historical context around it. Like, we know a lot of things about it. It's recent for a lot of people. It was just years ago, so it's not like it's still deep embedded in people's minds. That's got to take on a different, when you're talking about reviewing a movie based on a true story that's that close. Do they find that's more difficult, or is it easier to come at these movies this way? What kind of feedback do you get from these folks that are doing this?
I think that one in particular, not only because it's more recent, but also just because there's the whole top secret element to it, where we didn't know a lot of that stuff until even more recently than the events that happened. You think of reviewers and things like that, but when after that movie came out, you're talking about there were congressional hearings about the interrogation that was going on. A lot of it because of the popularity of the movie. They see the interrogations going on. Did we actually do these things? And it's the Peter Bergen guy that I talked to, he actually interviewed Osama bin Laden in 1997. So, it's fascinating. And I don't know if if you want to dig even deeper, there's an HBO documentary called Manhunt. It's actually based on another of Peter's books. And that dives into a lot of it. But something's fascinating about that documentary is the CIA actually gave permission to some of the people that had since retired, but the CIA gave permission for some of the people that were behind the scenes to actually talk about it. And they talk about the movie Zero Dark 30 a lot, and how things were portrayed versus how it actually was within reason. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that's still classified for sure when you're talking about the CIA. But it was fascinating.
Yeah. By the way, in the Army, we called it O Dark 30. So they even got the title wrong on it, but it's okay. If you want to say Zero Dark 30, that's okay. We said O Dark 30. Well, there's 3 really good episodes. You should go out. I've thrown them in the chat room. I'll make those available in the show notes, but 3 really good episodes with a lot of content. If you're looking for something else to listen to after you finish this one, don't go yet. Don't go yet.
Of course.
But check it out, based on a true story podcast.com. And I just super interesting stuff that you do, Dan. So thanks for doing that podcast. I appreciate it. Yeah. You when I pinged you about coming on, I was like, hey, what do you want to talk about? And you said, well, I bought a new camera, and we did too, I think, back in the spring for my daughter. She hasn't used it as much as I want to, but it raised a question, like, for the average guy, and maybe even the average guy and a little beyond that, it's 2022 and we have some pretty good capabilities in our phones, right? Do we really need, I mean, for most people, do we need DSLR cameras? And what's the advantage to tell me what you bought new, and then let's debate whether it's worth it or not.
Well, the new camera that guy is Panasonic Lumix G9, and it's actually what I'm using now, as I use it as a webcam to do for the podcast. So I've started doing video, so to boost the video there. It's not my daily driver that I use. That would be a Sony A7R4, and I use that. I also do photography as a side business as well. Whether or not it's needed, I think it really, I mean, like anything, it depends. Mm-hmm. The best, I've always said, the best camera is the one that you have with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're taking pictures of something, especially if it's like a sporting event, I mean, the zoom on your phone camera can only go so far before it starts to go into digital zoom and start to get pixelated. A lot of it has to do with the physics of the, just the way light going through the glass. And it's really, really hard to beat. The lenses is really where it is. I mean, the body is nice, but the lens is really kind of where you're going to get a lot of that sharpness. And so it really kind of depends on what you're using it for.
Okay. And you're, for those that are on audio and not on video, Dan is using it as a webcam at this point. How do you have it connected?
I'm using the Elgato CamLink 4K.
Okay.
So it goes in through HDMI to USB.
Pretty simple, and you're not restricted. Some of these cameras used to have 30-minute restrictions on them for whatever reason. I'm assuming this not so on this camera.
Well, they do, and that's more of a, as I understand it, would be more of a tax thing. It has to be a camcorder versus a regular camera. They do for recording, but I'm not recording right now. It's basically almost like a pass through at that point. Even when I'm doing it for the podcast, I actually record onto an Atomos Ninja Flame. So it's an external recorder. So I'm not recording on the camera itself. And that does not have a limit. It's actually, I've got it here, just records to an SSD. So it's whatever size your SSD is. So I've got a terabyte
Right.
that'll give me 5 hours of footage before I just it can do a hot swap too. So I just swap it out if I need to do that. But
we're streaming in 720 because that's the plan that I have on StreamYard. I'm assuming that could stream at 4K.
Yeah, I do 1080, but I record in 4K because then I can, if I want to do cuts in and out, and granted that's just from my side, but if I wanted to do that to give a little bit more visual difference, it gives me that opportunity to do that. One of the big reasons why I got it and changed, because I was just using a Logitech C920 camera or something like that, really had to do with just the quality that I was getting from that, because it would record. I use Squadcast to record, which I love, but the MP4 that would come out of that just what like the background behind me would just be super dark, and it would take a lot, and a lot of that data was just lost. So it'd be hard to bring that up. Where because I don't stream my show live, I record it. I have a lot of control now to be able to pull a lot of that. I could pull a lot of the shadows out. I can bring a lot of the highlights down, and get a lot of that control in post. Which, as a photographer, I love to do that. I love to have that control afterwards.
Yeah, you got all that data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in this case, you got all this data, and you can do a lot of things with them. From a photographer standpoint, or being a photographer, did the pandemic change photography in any way? In the sense that, for a lot of PC folks, like parts got hard to get. Were any things like that happened during the pandemic that made, and then did prices shoot up on you?
In my case, no, because I had already got the camera. I already had my daily driver before that. But no more. I don't think any more than anything else. I mean, it's the cameras are pretty much computers, right? And so it's going to have chips in it, and it's pretty much, yeah, things are going to go up. But for the most part, and even before, I have the A7R4 now, but I had an A7R2, and the lenses are the same. So, I mean, once I've got the body, then the lenses, you're kind of in a system, right? So the different lens mounts are going to be what the different systems are. And that part, a little bit, but no more than any other tech, I would say, going up.
Is there anything coming along? I mean, wasn't long ago 4K was a big deal. Today, that's pretty standard. What are photographers talking about right now? What's cutting edge in photography right now?
I think a lot of the standard systems are essentially everybody's moving to mirrorless. And you mentioned DSLR. Everybody's moving to mirrorless. Sony was one of the first ones to kind of do that. So they're kind of at the top as far as mirrorless technology, because they've had it for the longest. But even just recently, I think even within the last few months, companies like Nikon, Canon are kind of saying, or at least giving indicators, even if they haven't officially said so, but pretty much saying like, we're just not going to be making DSLRs anymore. Everybody's moving to mirrorless.
That's crazy how that just one day will disappear. I mean, that has been a standard for such a long time in what we've done with cameras, and now gone. Well, not yet, but we're pretty close, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty close. I mean, at this point, if you're getting a new camera, I would recommend a mirrorless. And I mean, there's of course with any sort of tech debate, right? You're going to have people on both sides. Personally, I don't really think that you need DSLRs anymore, because one of the big benefits to that would be you're actually looking through the lens, as opposed to mirrorless. You're not actually looking through the lens, but you're looking at basically a computer screen. And so for a long time, computers and technology just wasn't fast enough to be able to drive that, but now it is. And so you get some benefit. One of the big reasons I went to mirrorless from DSLR years ago was to do a feature called focus peaking, where I can see in camera what is in focus live, because it's a computer. And so it's showing me a live display, and I can see an outline of what is in focus. So I can know instantaneously, do I have the part in focus, which, especially when you're dealing with, aperture and stuff where you get the blur and everything, can be important. I just want to get this one eye in focus, the nose is out of focus, but I just want the one eye, that kind of thing.
Do you, lighting is a big deal still. And of course, I mean, I think the availability of good lighting, this lighting used to be ridiculously expensive. I mean, like stupidly expensive. Today, I think, is it still pretty reasonable to be able to get a fairly decent lighting rig that you can take with you?
Oh yeah, I think so. Especially because with LEDs have made the difference. I remember, date me, but I remember when I first got into photography and videography, not only what you didn't have LEDs, but you had to deal with the light bulbs. But on a lot of them, you have the tube, and so if you even touch the light bulb and then it gets hot, the grease from your finger would just shatter the bulb, things like that. And it just be hot and miserable in front of the lights because they'd be so hot. Now with LEDs, you can get down, real small. I think as with anything,
get them close, diffuse them easy, right? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think with any sort of tech, again, even with podcasting or sound or stuff, like, it depends, right? My space is going to be different than your space, and so the lights that you need to light that are going to be different.
When I first bought my first lighting rig for podcasting, and actually it was, somebody gave it to me as a gift. My lighting was so bad, they're like, I'm just going to buy you some new lighting.
Hey, maybe I'm just going to turn all these lights off and see
if somebody sends you some but it was all fluorescent. It was all those fluorescent bulbs that, the
little spiral.
The little spiral bulbs. And
I've still got some of those.
They're still, I mean, that's 10 years ago, and they still work great in a lot of ways. Now the color temperature isn't great, and so I blended them. I've actually started blending them with LEDs that I get a little bit more control out of, and then kind of blend it together, because the bright white light does have some use. But oftentimes, to get the right skin tone, you got to kind of blend it with some things. And so, but I remember thinking, you can get a pretty good lighting rig for a couple $100 that will at least get you better than not having it at all, where those systems used to be a couple grand. So easy to do that. You showed you showed us your storage, and certainly SSDs have really come down in price and are really affordable and are really rugged in a lot of cases, right? Do you the photographers used to carry around all these cards, right? Do you do that anymore, or can you got to be able to take pictures and just dump this stuff pretty fast, right? Is that kind of how it's working?
Yeah, pretty much. So my primary camera that I use, the Sony, it's got 2 SD card slots in it. So if one fills up, it'll go to the other. Honestly, I've never even filled up one, because you can get the SD cards that are large. I go with a 128 SD card, and that's a lot of pictures. But as soon as I get home, dump it off to my Synology, and then start working on it. And that way, I know some photographers that don't do that. They keep it on the card until they're completely done. I prefer to move everything over because that way there'll be times where I haven't gotten to edit the last batch of pictures before I have another shoot. And so then if I've got multiples and it's like, oh, wait, which copy do I have? I just like to have one working copy at any given time. That's just a personal workflow thing.
When we used to have film back in the old days, and you were limited by, really what you could take, and even in the early days of digital, those files were pretty small, and you weren't necessarily inclined to have a ton of them. But today, like you mentioned, you can't outshoot your SD cards for the most part. I mean, now there's people screaming at me in their car right now saying, "Yes, I can." Okay, I know you can do it. All right, you listening, yelling at me in your car right now, I know you can do it. But for the most part, right, outshooting that. But that does create a huge cache of files that have to be managed. How do you, and every photographer I talk to manages that a little bit differently. What's your system for keeping track of all that in folders, or how do you do it, Dan?
I've tried a lot of different ways. I've tried a lot of different software. I have found the thing that works best for me is just using folder structures instead of relying on any sort of software because that kind of goes out of date. So I just do it by date. I have a folder, for each year. So 2022, and then under that is going to be a folder 08. And then if I had a shoot today, it would be 04, and then location and who it's with, so whoever the subject is. And then in there, I use a software called Capture One, which is kind of a competitor to Lightroom. And in each one of those is going to be then the session that I actually start to edit those pictures in. So it keeps it pretty simple. Just, I think, organized all by date instead of trying to do. I used to do like the location or the subject type. Is this sports? Are these portraits? Is this landscape? All this kind of stuff. And it just got to be so confusing. So I just keep it simple.
Two things though, but date and then a person, or you also have that little bit of information in the file?
Yeah. So like if I were to do a shoot today, on August 4th, right? So it'd be in the 2022 folder. Under that would be 08. So I have all the different months, 01, 02, 08, and then it would be 04, and then being the day, and then just a little. I do location person because I shoot a lot more portraits and people than things like landscapes and stuff like that now. So location, so like where it was at, the specific, if it's in studio or if it's at a specific location, that kind of stuff, and then who it is. That just
give it some context so you can
exactly.
find it. With facial recognition has gotten a million times better in the last decade, maybe even the last 5 years. Do you ever use any of that to help find, a person or create any of that in your library to make it easier to find things?
I've tried it. And I've tried it using, Google Photos probably has been the best at facial recognition because they have all our pictures anyway. And I've used
them
other
in Facebook, right? Them in Facebook.
Yeah. I've used Mylio, I believe is what it was called. It was supposed to be kind of like a Google Photos, but local, so not going into the cloud, and do facial recognition, stuff like that. The big challenge that I found is, even though it works great most of the time, it's the few times that it doesn't tend to be the pictures that I'm looking for. And so it didn't recognize who that person is. Or, I need to go in there and create these people. And so for each one, I'll, create who they are and all that stuff. And yes, this is them. Oh, this is them. I shot them again, 3 years later. There's one family that I shoot in particular. I've shot maternity shots and then shot, the baby each year. And so there's a lot of change. And so the facial recognition on that kind of stuff just didn't really work very well. As babies change a lot.
Yeah, they do. They grow up fast. And I found my boys look a lot like me, and it would get us confused, in especially when they were younger.
Yeah.
And so again, not I don't think a reason to poo-poo it. I think it's gonna continue. I mean, we just continue it will just continue to get better.
Oh, it will.
It's always the use case of it, right? And I think the ability to, and this is where I think it goes, hey, I'm looking for a picture when I was in New York City and I was over here, doing this where it really probably starts to get useful. I'll be honest, even though I started this conversation with this, I've got this beautiful camera here. I take less pictures than I ever have in my whole life, even though I have a camera with me at all times. It's just I've just kind of stopped taking pictures. It's weird. And Dan, I don't know why. Is it because I'm like because everybody else does? And I'm just like, well, like I'm in everybody else's pictures. I'll just grab it from there. Or it's the craziest thing. I don't have as I've gotten older, I'm just taking less pictures. Have you heard of that before? It's weird.
I mean, I think everybody's different.
Yeah.
Personally, one of the ways that I like to experience things, just I guess being as a photographer, I like to experience it through a lens. And so I experience things better. Kind of like, when I'm in a meeting, I pay attention better when I'm actually taking notes. I might not even refer to the notes later on, but I'm doing that. Another thing that I've used, this is a workflow thing that I've found helpful to be able to find pictures later on, is to take advantage of that. You mentioned location. And so when I'm actually on set or I'm taking pictures somewhere where I'm doing that, I'll make sure to take some kind of just behind the scenes pictures, because that tags the location, that tags the date. And so I can go back into Apple Photos or Google Photos and look. I remember vaguely where I was at. I remember vaguely and look at that. Okay, that was it. Okay. And then I go back to my folder structure. Here are the high quality pictures that I took that day.
I've been walking for the 2 years of the pandemic. I've been walking our local cemetery. And you might be like, Jim, that's pretty morbid, but it's because it's got hills in it and it's quiet and there's nobody there. Right. I mean, there's lots of people there, but you know what I mean?
That was morbid.
Yeah. And so that's a dad joke if I ever heard one. So I joined this find a grave site where people can request, right? Hey, find a headstone. So I've actually started going, so that cemetery shows up first, and if they request a grave, I see it, I get an email, and then I make an effort to go find it, and I probably found 15 or 20 in there, and then I shoot pictures of the headstones that are out there, right, or what's going on around it. Google must think I am absolutely losing my mind because all that's showing up in my picture are dead people, like, our gravestones. Like, what is wrong with this guy, right? So if you look at on my phone, if you look at the pictures, the majority, well, there's two things: they're headstones and cigars, and so like, I gotta start, Dan. I gotta start taking pictures of other like people and family members, but all my family's pretty active in taking pictures. And seriously, I kind of think I'll just like if I see a good one, I'll just take it from them, right? Because you can, right?
Yeah, well, I think in my case in particular, again, it's use case. Since I am a photographer, everybody just kind of assumes I'm going to be the one that brings my camera and takes the pictures, and so they use mine. And I think it's kind of similar, like when you're the tech person, right? You're the one that's going to fix the computer. You're going to one that's going to fix things, and it's kind of similar when you're a photographer. It's you're the one in the family that's going to take the pictures.
I've seen some of these sites try this where it takes a whole bunch of people's pictures and puts them together. It attempts to stitch together a location or a monument or a trail, a hike, a mountain, right? How do you feel about like what if collectively we all our pictures could come together to help do that, to capture a point and to capture history at a point in time? There's all kinds of privacy concerns in that. I get it. But how do you feel about that? The kind of the collective, it sounds like the Borg, but the Borg of pictures. How do you feel about that?
I think, I mean, you're going to have the privacy thing aspect of it. I think the big challenge to that is because everybody takes pictures differently. And so depending on what the event is, there's a benefit to seeing the different angles, But there's also like, if I'm taking pictures of my family, like, you don't know who my family is. So is it really that interesting to you? Even though I might have been at this event that you're interested in, most of my pictures were of my family at the event, not necessarily the event itself. And so there's that sifting through a lot of that's beyond the just geotagging and facial recognition and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if technology is really there yet to be able to stitch all that together and do it in a way that is not dealing with the privacy issues that are always going to be there.
Well, and certainly Google has figured out, they use humans, I think, still to do this, but they blur out faces in their Google Maps images and such. They kind of go through and do that. But you kind of wonder if we took all the pictures that didn't have people in them and made those available publicly for an archive, like an archive.org for pictures, where you could submit pictures.
That could be cool. I mean, because then you could have a timeline of history and see pictures. I mean, because you kind of have that now, like in Google Photos, you have the map and any restaurant or any place like that, you can see pictures that people have taken there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see why you couldn't do that for time as well.
Yeah, there's a super cool site. Let me see if I can remember the name of it. It is called, give me just a second here. It's in my shortcuts. It's called NETR Online. It's a viewer of historical aerial views. So if you think about, and I'll throw a link to that in the show notes when we're done. When you think about aerial views that have been taken from the 30s and the 50s and the 60s, and then of course we get more and more as we get closer to the current era. This is a site that's kind of archived them all, and you can go to a spot in the map. Then you can say, okay, show me the available aerials, and you can literally time shift through them and see, hey, what was like where I live here in Bellevue, Nebraska. I can see that in 1952 nothing was here. Right, it was a farmer's field. I can see the old homestead that was just across, that now is across the street. It's gone, but that's where the homestead for this area was. And it gives you some historical context of that. And again, does it in a nice way, no privacy concerns, some of those kinds of things where you're not worried about that kind of stuff. But it's allowed me, and like I think you were alluding to this with Street View, I can go into Google Street View and then say, hey, what did this, I can go to an intersection and kind of say, what did this look like 10 years ago? I think is probably as far back as you can go on Google. I'd love to see some more. And I think PhotoSynth, Microsoft had this thing called PhotoSynth. And I think that it was, and of course they're always too early on stuff. This was way too early for it to be productive. But that, to me, that is interesting, because if I could ever invent something, if I could invent one thing, what I'd invent is a portal to the past, where you could look through it and say, okay, show me what this looked like in 1890. Like that would be so fascinating, right? Well, if we collected enough pictures over a long enough time of some of these areas, maybe you get something like that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there are definitely sites out there now where they do things like from World War II. You can see this street and then how it is now, and the little slider back and forth to see stuff like that. Yeah, that would be fascinating.
Yeah. And I think using AI to the thing is, you can't have, like, often those pictures are digitally enhanced by you. Like, you're a human. You're doing it, Dan, because you know how to do this kind of stuff, right? You're lining the pictures up just right and get the orientation just right.
The camera's always going to be a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah. The guy took the picture in 2017, has no idea where they placed the camera for that for that building then. But no, I find those very, very fascinating, and it would be great, I think, to turn some of this machine power over to stitching. Stitching is a wrong word, but smartly putting these things together in a way to give us context based on time, right? Almost like a time lapse. So, anyways, I didn't plan to go down that rabbit hole, but man, it sure sounds cool, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that would be fascinating. I also love that, if there's one thing you can invent, it would be a portal through time. I mean, keep the bar pretty high there.
No, it's never going to happen, but it would be super cool if it, I was watching this YouTube video on space-time stuff. And, if you go, if you go fast enough and this in the universe and look back this way, you're actually seeing in the past. And I was like, that's what I want, except I want it at a micro level. Especially as I'm walking through the cemetery on a daily basis, I'm kind of like, this cemetery's been here since 1865. Like, it's an old cemetery. I wonder what it looked like, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years after, during those times. We alluded to this in the pre-show. Those folks that lived out here in those years, very different life than we live today, and not a glamorous one at all. So be interesting to see how they live. Okay, to get back on track, not really. We don't really have a track to get back on, but you're taking all these photos. This is where we were going, and you're dropping them to your Synology. Have you always what have you used for backup in the past before you did the Synology? How were you doing it?
External drives.
Yeah.
Yeah, just external drives. And I need a new one. I get a new external drive, throwing more space.
Were you backing them up? Were you backing up to the cloud in any way in those days, or were you doing anything?
Yes. Okay. So for a long time, I was on Google's Google Drives, with their workspace having unlimited space. That's gone away now. So not really.
I was gonna say allegedly.
Yeah. Well, it was for a while. I had like 70 terabytes on there at one point.
But download that mess. Holy cow.
Well, that's why I need the Synology.
Right.
But yeah, no, I just in prep for this to kind of get an idea. I've never really gone back, but I do roughly about 6 photo shoots a month or so. Each one's about 150 gigs plus the podcast. I use a little over a terabyte a month, roughly, of stuff that gets generated. So the process that I have now, and I'm definitely open to suggestions on moving forward, because when you start eating up that much space, of course, it doesn't go away.
No.
It's
only getting bigger.
It's only getting bigger.
Yeah.
So I've because I already had a bunch of those external drives I was using before the Synology. My process now is I use the Synology for my working files. So like more recent things, and then kind of roughly about 5 years or so, I kind of put it into what I deem kind of long-term storage, which I have then being on the external drives, backed up to Backblaze, that sort of thing. And I have them redundant on multiple external drives. So there's multiple local and then to Backblaze. So that kind of frees up the Synology to be more just working things, because it's a lot easier to access that across my network.
A lot faster to do it that way. What did you get from a Synology standpoint? What did you purchase?
I've got the DS1520 Plus, so 5 bay, and I've got 4 of those used with 16 terabyte drives in there. So it's nice. Roughly, well, I'm using their I have it pulled up here. I'm using their hybrid RAID. So it's about 43.6 terabytes of space, what I have there now. But I do have 1 bay open, so I could throw in another 16 terabytes or so in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there's going to be a point where I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do as I'm adding more stuff. Of course, the camera that I use now as a daily driver, it's the A7R4. It's a 60 megapixel camera. So each picture that it takes is 50 to 60 megs. And I'm sure whatever the next one's going to be years from now, it's only going to be more. Video, of course, adds on top of that. Now that I'm starting to do a video for the podcast at higher quality, of course, that adds up a lot of space too, a lot more than just the audio. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd love to get your advice, Jim, on do you think I should get another Synology and just basically just kind of keep doing that? Because each one of those could last for a while. Just throwing drives.
Let me ask you this fundamental question. Do you think you need to keep everything forever?
Well, I am a bit of a digital hoarder. I will admit that.
I know, we all are. Listen, everybody who listens to this show is like, they're screaming at me right now out of their car. Yes, Jim, yes. Everything forever.
I try not to keep anything that I can download again. So things like stock photo subscriptions, things like that. Like I can go download those again. Mostly the things that I keep or want to keep forever, I think, are things like the pictures, the video, the podcast stuff, all the source files, all that kind of stuff. My background before doing podcasts was in visual effects. So a lot of those files that honestly I haven't really gone back to in a long time, but they're still there. And they're ones that, I'm the only one that has those. There's no way that I could get them back from anywhere if I lost them. So I don't know.
It's a question I think about all the time. With my dad passing away a few years ago, my mom just passed away. She had a whole my mom had been hoarding pictures we didn't even know about. Like, we knew my dad's stuff. We didn't know about my mom's stuff. Whole boxes full of things we didn't know. And in a perfect world, you'd run those through a quick digital scan, and you keep them. To what end? Right? We went through them and enjoyed them in the moment. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We here at our house, we call that a Walter Mitty moment. Right. You're present, you're in it, you enjoy it for what it is. But by keeping those photos, and I could, the equivalent would be, I'd buy a safe that's fireproof, and I would take those pictures and put them in a fireproof, or I'd make a copy of them, then I would put them in a fireproof safe, right, type thing. Almost never to look at them again, because I looked at them once already, and yet we're always enticed by this. Yeah, but what if I wanted to? What if I did want to go back? And there's this cost justification, like, how much is it worth to you to be able to go back to say, I could go back. I may never go back and look at those things. I may never want to. So Dan, I don't know if I have an answer. Like, I think everybody's got to kind of decide what their own values are. I do know this, that those pictures meant nothing to my children. So by the second generation, there's no interest. They're just like, oh, ha, ha, ha. If I said to them, you want to keep them? No, no, not interested. Right. And now you might find archivist or people who do family tree type stuff. There's always going to be one in a generation that wants to go back and be super pissed that you got rid of all this stuff. Right? Why did you throw that stuff away?
Well, once you invent that time portal, you got to have the pictures, dude.
There you go. See, that time portal all of a sudden sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Elon needs to invent this thing. But it's, then as I was talking about those pictures to my brother, he said, well, I was like, I'll just throw them away. He's like, well, you can't throw them away. We need to shred them. And I'm like, this isn't evidence from a trial.
What kind of pictures are these?
These are pictures. And he's like, I know, but they have people's faces on them. It became a privacy issue, just like we talked about here a second. These are printed pictures. It became a privacy issue now at this point. Now, most of these pictures are long gone, but he still wanted them shredded, right? Okay, so fast forward to our digital content, and you think, do I really need, I went through my podcast material and I was keeping every version of everything I'd ever made. And then I was like, well, I could recreate, I don't need the video large and video small. I could recreate those from the original if I needed to. If I really needed it, I could create it from the original. Yeah, it'd be a little bit of work, but I could do it. So I started going through and I deleted terabytes of those files, just because it was like, yeah, these are just artifacts of things that I already have. And I have 500, we're in 541 just of Home Gadget Geeks. I've created 2,000 or 3,000 of these at work. How many times do people need to see me, right, in this kind of stuff, or me go back to them? So I may be a bad one to ask, Dan, because again, a lot of our listeners, we're all digital hoarders.
Yeah.
But I don't, you kind of start wondering, like, how long does this stuff need to live for? Go ahead.
You brought up a good point of recreating. I wonder if maybe that's a workflow thing. And now just kind of thinking out loud, like, if I were to change the folder structure for my podcast, so I'm sure, like, a lot of projects, you could have a kind of a template folder structure that you use pretty much the same. I wonder if maybe splitting out there of, okay, these are the project files, and then these are the files that are rendered and generated that are safe to delete. Like,
right,
after a certain period, these are safe to delete, and because they can be recreated with these source files here.
Yeah.
That could free up a lot of space. I'm not really organizing it that way right now, but.
Well, but now you're splitting your files up. Like, I have this working area. I got this saving area. Do I use the same structure for them? I mean, it is maddening when you start thinking about,
That's why I just
Mike
save
Howard.
everything.
Exactly. No, because you can.
Yeah.
Like
That's true.
that's the thing. You can right now. You can. In the future, will you be able to? Mike Howard, who passed away a few years ago, longtime listener of the show. He also was a big photographer, and he had a big 80 terabyte server 6 years ago before anybody had those kinds of things, right? He literally kept absolutely everything. Now, when Mike passed away, you think, did his family know enough to, like, what happened to all that stuff? And his site's gone now. And, you think somebody went, oh, that was Mike's stuff. It's gone.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a difference between legacy and working, right?
Yeah.
You're in the midst of working on things. Home Gadget Geeks is 10 years old. I've probably got 2 terabytes, maybe 3 of data that I've created on this program that I keep because I'm currently working on this project. I think if I stopped doing this podcast, I may have to make some decisions like, do I really want to pay for a server the rest of my life so that these files exist somewhere? Or do I trust them to things like YouTube, which won't last forever, or archive.org, which won't last forever? I was going to ask you, why don't you store, you've got the Synology stuff, you use Backblaze, so you are storing it to the cloud, so to speak. But
Yeah.
let me ask you this. If something were to happen to you, you were incapacitated, or one day you just decided you weren't going to do this anymore, would anybody besides you know how to access this stuff?
That's where LastPass comes in. They've got that
Okay.
emergency access. So I've got family members that have access to like emergency access for that.
Good.
To be able to access. And then in there, I've got, all the, not only the usernames, passwords, obviously, but the secure notes to be able to access stuff. So they could.
If you passed, Dan, would they? Like, would they care? Do you think they'd care enough to do, or would they be like, let's just turn the lights out and let these files go?
I think
this
for
is terribly
work things,
morbid show. Sorry.
No, you're good. Well, I do have some people in my family that are big into ancestry, so I think for that purpose, they might on some of them. Stuff like the podcast, they probably wouldn't, because that's my project. That's not necessarily related. Pictures that I take for clients and things like that, that they don't know, probably wouldn't. I think there might be some. Now, whether or not they take the time to split those out based on my folder structures to know which ones they want to keep or not.
Right.
That's a good question. That's time. Who knows?
Dan, they're going to look at that file structure and they're going to be like, there's 10 years of photos. There's no way I'm going to have time. Somebody's going to dig into
done.
Exactly. Somebody's going to dig into one folder and oh, this is kind of cool. Yeah. Control A, Control D. Right? Like, well, that's done. It's just an interesting subject, and most of the listeners here have aged along with me. You haven't aged, but everybody else is aged in the process, and we're getting to that point. And I've had listeners pass away, and not just old listeners. I had my niece's husband, young, and he was a listener to the show. He passed away, drowned a couple years ago. And you start wondering, like, does anybody care beyond me if I'm keeping all this stuff? Again, separating the work, because the work stuff that you do, you got to kind of keep that for various reasons, right? But it does get you start thinking about all this digital content. Good that you have LastPass. I have premium LastPass too, so Sarah could get in here. I wanted her to know all the passwords to all the financial sites so she get the money. That's worth something.
Yeah.
Right. That's worth something. So I don't know. It's an interesting subject on how much, because we can store, 80 terabytes. What you said, you had 43 terabytes available for you in the
Synology. I've got another 70 or so with the external drives that are kind of more long-term. But honestly, a lot of that, like I said, is duplicate. So I don't know off the top of my head exactly how much of that are copies of things, because external drives fail.
If today an external hard drive did fail, do you feel like you have a good enough process to be able to recreate it in a timely manner that doesn't ruin a whole Saturday?
In a timely manner, that's a different question. He had me until the timely manner part. I did have one fail a few months ago. And honestly, the first step with the downside with the external drives, I've got them all plugged into. I got a little mini PC, so they're all plugged into the same computer to access pretty easily. And the downside is like figuring out which drive is the one that I can't see anymore, because I don't access that stuff a lot. It just sits there because it's kind of long term.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's, this one Backblaze gave me a notification that it can't see this drive anymore. Oh, which one is that? Which one is physically is this drive that's
Right.
plugged in, and then
Right.
figure out how much space I need to get a new drive and all that kind of stuff. So
It needs to be simple enough that you'll do that. I mean, it's like, it's like you take something really, these old pictures that we have, I put them in a box and I put them in the shed. And then I think they're safe, but I didn't realize that over in the last 10 years, there's been a leak in the roof that's dripping on the box. And now the box is ruined and all the pictures are ruined inside of it. I think there's the modern day equivalent of, and what do they call this? Digital rot, I think is what it's called, where because you have so much stuff, you lose, you didn't lose it, you lose track of it,
right.
and you're like, okay, where is that and how? And oh my God, this hasn't backed up for 4 years. And like it goes offline, but you don't have a system to check it on a regular basis. And so you realize one day, oh yeah, it's okay. I don't need those anymore. Until the next week. Right.
Yeah, well, maybe that goes back to kind of what you were saying. Like, do we need this stuff? As you were talking about that, the physical side of it reminds me of a story. My brother, at one point, he was moving houses just down the street, like from a house that had a non-finished basement to a house in the same development that had a finished basement. And he had been using his basement that was not finished in the old house pretty much as storage. And then when he moved to the new one, he was looking at all these boxes and bags and things like that. And he's like, I haven't opened these. I've lived here for about 10 years. I'm not even going to look at them. If it was something important, I would have used it by now or looked for it. And so it's like, maybe that's the point. You're like, do we really need this?
And that's easy to say until like I at some point in time when I was in high school, I owned a Timex Sinclair 1000, one of the very early membrane keyboards PCs, right? And it just was a terrible computer, but it was mine, right? And at some point in time, I made that decision, like, because there's this curve where it's useful, and then there's a dip where it becomes unuseful, and then at some point that turns back around, comes back up, and it becomes valuable because it's old. But you never know where that dip is going to be. Like
it's when the museum start calling for it.
Exactly. Like I'm still holding on to an old Wii. I've got an original Xbox because I'm holding on to those things because I threw out that Timex Sinclair 1000 and I can't now. I wish I had it, and in the day it made perfect sense. This thing doesn't run on anything. It's a piece of junk. Now today it's valuable because it's nostalgia. So you have those moments where those things come back to bite you, and then you're like, okay, screw it. I'm keeping everything.
Yeah. But I mean, especially when you're talking about tech like that, it's not just the device, but like, do you still have the power cable or the type of connector? Like, I mean, same sort of thing I found in my little, I'm sure we all have a box of cables and things like that. I found a keyboard that was a PS2 connector, like the little round, right? Like none of my computers have that connect. Like this keyboard is useless. I can't use it for anything because it just won't plug into anything.
No, you lose the brick. The standard goes out. It's like, it would be like today having a zip disk, but no drive, like, well, I got this thing.
I had those, man, 150 megs. When do we ever use that much space?
Huge click of death. That guy listen, I had a whole backup strategy around that thing. And that was going to save me right in those days. But, Brian says in the chat, he says, and the older electronics, older in quotes, while dated, seem not to break down as often as more contemporary electronics. And I think, and meant to be more disposable. I think he's right in that sense, but it's that one thing that burns you, the Timex Sinclair, that then all of a sudden now I'm going to be a hoarder. I'm keeping the Wii. I'm going to keep the original Xbox. I'm keeping all this because I realized this. You got to keep the power plugs. You got to keep peripherals so that you can do stuff with them. The games, so you got something to play if you want to do that. So I have these big old boxes of these things, and you're like, and the question is, Am I going to use it again today? No. But am I going to be super angry in 10 years when I want to pull that thing out to show a friend? And even worse, when I go, what are my kids going to do with that box? Are they going to open it and go, "Oh, silly dad. Silly. He's so silly. Take this thing to the recycle," right? You've moved this thing all over the world just so your kids can take it to a recycler, right? So I don't know.
Well,
It's
I mean, but some of that there is nostalgia to it too. I mean,
yeah,
I know just in my family, some of the generational gaps. I think it was a Super Nintendo that
mhm,
just an old Super Nintendo that somebody found, and the kid had never played one. It's like, but I know these games because they're on the Nintendo Online, right? And
yeah.
so they get to play the game that they're familiar with as their parents played it. And so I mean, yeah, it could be that too.
It's a real representation of history. This goes back to what we were talking about with these pictures, right? And keeping what do you keep and how long do you keep it, and is the storage worth it? And will that moment come when the nephew is over and you're like, let's play,
Yeah.
let's play Mario Kart, or let's go play Space Invaders. That was such a great game. And you play it now and you're like, this thing is the dumbest thing.
How did I have fun with this?
How did we play this for hours and we gave the machine money to do
Uh,
this?
well, they have. I mean, I'm sure they have them everywhere, but I know at least here in OKC, they've been a kind of a resurgence of pop up of retro bars that have the arcade games and all those retro games and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I
Uncle
think that
Mars says Centipede, right? That was another one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you can. It's just not the same though. Like I can go back and play Pac-Man on my computer, right? But it's different than when you were standing at the screen at 7-Eleven feeding that thing quarters because you had risk and you
Mm-hmm.
were paying money for this, right? And there
Precious
was
money. Those quarters are yeah.
yeah, that that'd be like $50 million in today's inflation. And so it just brought it back. Well, to go back to your little question, when we talk about the Synology and how much is enough and are you doing it right? I think it sounds like, I mean, right is the and I'll put right in air quotes. Doing it right means you know how to get it back if something goes wrong, right? And are there easier ways to do it? Maybe. Do you want to spend? I think about this sometimes. I was like, well, I've got all these drives that are attached in a various way, and I could buy a $300 enclosure, but is that really worth it to me? It's working this way.
Yeah.
Why don't I just leave it though? It's working. I think sometimes we obsess too much on the hardware and not enough on the processes around actually backing it up, checking it, and then making sure I can restore it. I've been burned way too many times where I thought I was doing it right and I went to get it and it wasn't there. So I
Oh
think we
yeah.
need to spend a little more time on that too. Do you feel like you could get do you feel like you have a good plan to get all that, to get any bit? If I deleted something from 2016, your whole 2016 folder disappears. Do you feel like you could get it back?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the biggest challenge would be honestly would be knowing that folder disappeared because at that point, if it's not something that I'm actively working on, um, until I go back and want to work on it again. A great example actually that just came up recently. One of the recent episodes that I did was the first time I've gone back and remastered an interview from 2017. So I was going back into my old folder structures and finding files and finding that some of the files weren't there and having to go back and restore them from backups and things like that. And finding that I was using completely different software that I'm using now, and just all those types of things that I kind of want. I wanted to do that just to go through that process. That was kind of part of it too. Was if I did want to do that, how difficult would it be? I got it. It wasn't the easiest, but I was able to.
Yeah. In a former life, I was a data warehousing guy for a bank, and so we had all this data and we had all these systems of checks put in place because we had to balance the bank every day to the penny. And so, No one was interested in like, I don't know where that $10 went or where that 10,000. We'll find it tomorrow.
We'll find it
Like
tomorrow.
said no one in banking ever, right? Type thing. But you bring up an interesting point. So we had all kinds of checks and measures in place, and I think this is another thing people miss in the backup schema of things is how do you know when you moved a folder over, everything moved over? Like there's no we miss like how many items did you start with today and how many did I add today? Then okay, I have this many items. Most people don't track their data that way. Even then, they don't even track it in size oftentimes, right? So if a file transfer fails and say a whole folder drops out and you didn't know you didn't copy it over, you don't know because you didn't tie it. There's no checksum, right, to these processes and knowing like, oh yeah, all of 2016 is gone. I think this is an area we're missing of being able to constantly check. You almost need something that's constantly checking those folders to say, yep, everything's there.
Is there some sort of an indexing type software that could do that where you're not, I mean, not necessarily, it's not like a syncing, but just index, okay, this is everything from last month. These are the things that are actually, I wonder if, just off the top of my head, a long time I've used software called Beyond Compare to make moves and stuff like that, where it compares the different folders. Yep. And I'm pretty sure you can export like text files and stuff like that of what the folder structure is, and then just see highlighted. These are the differences.
Good compare. Yeah. Say this is a snapshot of everything that I have from a file perspective. And nightly I'm going to have it check and I'm going to get a report or something. This is the hard part. All that stuff is easy to do. The question is, after a while, like it gets super boring to check that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And then you stop.
Well, I don't think you need to do it for everything. I think there's, there's going to be some things that, maybe not the entire 2016 folder, but the folder of, your kid's birth or something like, something that's like some momentous occasion that, okay, this, I want to make sure that nothing gets lost in this, or, this is a huge client project. I want to make sure nothing gets lost in this in case they're going to come back, that kind of thing. I think,
Yeah, right on. It's almost like a tagging, but then you got to go in and tag it. Listen,
why does everything take time?
We're the weakest link. Like this is the problem. I've discovered the problem. The problem is us. We're the weakest link on these things because we don't want to check them on a regular basis. We don't have the accountability to make sure the numbers match when we're moving files. This happened. Dave McCabe, who was the host on a home service show, when we used to talk about this stuff, he had lost a complete section of his family's photos one time in moving them over. He got in a hurry or whatever and didn't check, and then you don't know what you don't know. And I think he was able to go back and restore them, but the fear in his eyes when he was like, I had to tell Sandy that I'd lost files, and he was a home server guy. We did a show about it, right? So this is every photographer's nightmare. And I think in some regard is how do you, and you have both the worst of both worlds, because not only you're a photographer, but you're a podcaster. Like you're just creating gigantic files all the time. Like it's
why I never lost.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
for sure.
Well, if you do get to a point where you want to consolidate your drives, having two Synology is not a bad idea. There's going to be a cost factor involved in that, depending on how you want to do the Synologies, whether you want to do one on site and one off site somewhere, and you want to replicate between the two of them. A lot of folks do that, and then they keep one copy in the cloud somewhere, right? That's in the advent of today's modern high-speed internet. That's reasonable for most people. Now you'd have to ask the question, do you get throttled on your bandwidth after a certain, do you have bandwidth caps on your
thankfully
internet?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
fiber,
you're fine.
No.
You're fine. But if you had a 1 terabyte limit, which a lot of folks do,
right,
in a month,
or if it's offsite, wherever that would be, if that does as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of the guys that that listen to this show do that. They'll have a piece of equipment local, and they have one off site, and they just replicate it off site, right? And then you get the value of the speed. You want it local for speed purposes. You don't want to be dragging things down out of the cloud all the time. Right. But you have a piece of physical hardware somewhere else that you own. Because for a while, these online services were dropping like flies. Like, we're quitting. I know we said we were going to do this, but we're not going to do this anymore. You're
Lifetime
at back.
access for $100. Yeah, that's gonna last.
Exactly. Yeah, Backblaze, and so do I, and they've been pretty good, and it's there as well. But you can't trust your cloud provider either, right? You
Right.
need to, at some point, you have to have zero trust in all of this. Can't trust your local copies, so you got to put them in the cloud. You can't trust the cloud copies, so you ideally you put them somewhere else off site. And you always just have to kind of think zero trust on all these things. Like, yeah, I can't trust any of these, so I've got to spread this thing around to make sure. And you can't trust your hardware locally. So you can't trust the location. If you have two copies in the same location and that location melts.
Yeah. Which everything is melting these days with the temperatures, as we were talking about. So
I know. Right on. Well, Dan, thanks for saying yes to, I think, what was a fun conversation. We haven't done this around since I lost my coward. We have not had a good photography conversation, but especially when you think about just this task of storing and keeping files, and it's complicated.
Yeah. It takes time. And that's the thing, is that, everything takes time, and that's time that is not factored into doing the actual work.
Time and attention.
Yeah.
I think people, they think, well, I'm just keeping my files. And you're like, yeah, but you make files for a living. That's what you do. And for you, in both cases, you're creating, a lot of data for a living. It's probably worth the time and the attention. Good for you for getting that Synology. It's probably worth the time and attention to make sure you're getting in it. And listen, every time I had a show like this in the past, I'd spend all weekend checking all my backups. Crap. Now, is it working? I haven't checked it in a year.
It's always a good reminder to do that. Yeah.
No, for sure. John Biggs says irony is pretty ironic sometimes, and I think that's true as well. If you haven't done it yet, head out to based on a true story podcast.com. You can get more of Dan out there. He's a friend of the show, and we'll continue to have him back as we have topics and stuff to discuss. And so, Dan, thanks for taking the time to be a part of the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Yeah. Can you hang around for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. Hang tight. Just a couple reminders on the way out. One, a big thanks to our Patreon subscribers. I mentioned that earlier. Dan is a Patreon supporter for us over at Ask the Podcast Coach. But you can do that here for Home Gadget Geeks. I got plans that start at $5. Always appreciate the support. Many of you have asked me, how can I do that? And there's just one easy way to get it done. Head out to theaverageguy.tv/Patreon. And a big thanks to all of you who do that on Patreon as well. Big thanks to Christian over at Maplegrove Partners. If you need a website, Dan, by the way, if you ever need a website, we got a great service for you. Head over to maplegrovepartners.com. Christian's got plans for just about everything as little as $10 a month. He told me the other day he is the inflation fighter. He's not going to raise his prices today. So $10 get you started on a site, and he'll do just about anything you want that you need. And he's super open and super available. maplegrovepartners.com. And of course, Home Gadget Geeks, powered by Maplegrove Partners. They do everything for us. And so, Christian, appreciate your support. If you want to join us in the Discord group, you can do that, theaverageguy.tv/Discord. If you want to leave me a message, head over to homegadgetgeeks.com. There's a little blue button in the right-hand corner. Click on that. You get 30 seconds to leave me a message. Leave your questions, comments, whatever. We'll play them right here on the show if you want to get that done that way. Just do me a favor. Email me, Jim at theaverageguy.tv, if you leave that voicemail message. I don't always get notified that it's there. Found one that was like 6 months old one time, and I had to apologize. So send me an email, Jim at theaverageguy.tv. Any of your feedback, you can send me an email as well. We are live every Thursday. Just about every Thursday, more now than we were early in the summer. 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, out here at theaverageguy.tv/live. If you're listening to this and you're like, man, Jim got this out early, it's because I'm headed to Texas this weekend, and I am producing this thing. As soon as we're done, I'm going to thank Dan, and I'm flying out of here to get this thing produced. So you're welcome. You're welcome for having it early. Dan, again, thanks for coming out tonight. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody. All right, chat room, I'm going to get going. Dan, hang tight for me 1 second. We will see you guys next week. We'll have some post show next week. So thanks for coming out. We'll see you guys. Take care.